So much on my mind, keep it all in line, juggling tasks that fall from the sky. Oh, what a scene, somewhere on this road, there is a load that's lighter for me. Show me the road that's lighter for me.
Welcome to episode 12 of the series, Chaos to Calm. I'm your host, Noelle Kirshner. I'm a minister, mother of three, and writer. I've published in places like the Today Show Parenting Team, the Huffington Post, and Crosswalk.com. I'm particularly interested in exploring how faith can help us move from chaos to calm. Our nation has certainly known chaos recently. Following the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, it has been reeling. Widespread protests have ensued, and our already divisive political environment feels even more so. Luckily, my guest today can help. I am delighted to welcome my second Emmy award-winning journalist on the show, Linsey Davis. Linsey is a correspondent for ABC and an anchor for ABC Live. She has covered important stories like 2 presidential Democratic debates for this election cycle, the recent space launch, and importantly, the funeral for George Floyd. I invite you to check out Linsey's Instagram feed for other important stories on race in America. Linsey is also the best-selling children's book author of 2 books. Her most recent book, One Big Heart, is on racial inclusion, and we'll especially focus on that today. I encourage you to stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how you can win both of Linsey's books that are included in a gift bundle, courtesy of the Christian publisher Zonder Kids. Linsey, it is such a delight to have you here, especially with what is facing our nation. Your recent book on inclusion for children strikes such a chord. I see that it is a bestseller on Amazon. It's currently sold out. So it begs the question, what are some ways that we as Americans can start moving in a positive direction? And I really want to get at practical steps that every one of our listeners can take to be supportive of that change. And to start, since I'm a pastor, I wanted to just tell you that as I've been following you from afar, I love that you're open about your faith. Your recent book definitely references it, but I've also seen on your Twitter bio that you reference Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And I was wondering, can you tell me what that verse means to you?
Sure. Well, for anybody who doesn't know, the basic premise is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And I think that it's pretty self-explanatory. I think that it's like if people are looking for the cliff notes to how they ought to be a great disciple or citizen, that's it. I think I believe in humility. I believe in being just and fair. And I think that that's also speaks to the job that I'm in as a journalist. I'm not one that believes that you should be telling people what they should think about the news. I've always considered myself to be a storyteller, and now I do it with the news. And so I think that it's necessary that you are just and balanced and fair. And I think that that's more important now than ever. As in the context of the current events that we're seeing, the climate, I think that quite often people will say, like, if I were to say, this is not just, or this is injustice, and people might say, well, that's editorializing. But I think that there are certain times when there are facts, right? And people now, seeing the video and the death of George Floyd, I think that people are coming to this. I'll give you this example. There was a protester, an older white male protester who I saw. It was just a picture of him, and he was carrying a sign that said, "I finally get it." And I think that so much of our country and our world is saying that they finally get it. I think that in 2008, a lot of people thought that when President Obama became the first Black president in this country that, oh, we're in this post-racial America, and people would debate about whether or not racism still existed. And I think that now people are collectively saying, I finally get it.
Well, looking at the death of George Floyd on video, it's just, there's no wiggle room. As a person who saw it, it was something I wish I could unsee. It made me nauseated. It was, it was a horrific event on so many levels. And I do have to say, when you talk about being a storyteller, it's very clear. I follow your Instagram, and I've seen many of the stories that you've done, but particularly ones that relate to race in America. You ask very appropriate, very probing questions. And I would say the first time I especially wanted you to come on the show was when I saw you interview a civil rights activist following the death of Ahmaud Arbery. And it also made me feel that feeling of nausea to hear in detail what Shaun King was saying. But I think it was a voice that needed to be heard. And so something that I saw one of your Instagram followers call you was Esther. I saw her say that, something about what you're doing is like Esther. And I don't know, do you want to comment anything about that?
Well, I think it's a unique perspective that I and anyone who's a person of color during this time, reporting on this, being an eyewitness to this moment in history, I think that our perspective is like a two-ness. W.E.B. Du Bois often talked about how being Black and American, you're ever conscious of this two-ness. And I think that that's how I would describe this moment, and helping people to see out of a different lens, a lens that may be unfamiliar to them, and one that they're not used to kind of thinking about the perspective. Benjamin Franklin, and I can't remember the exact quote, so I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but it's something to the effect of, you won't have true justice until the least affected become as outraged as those who are affected. And I think that says a lot about where we are in this country. And I'm optimistic that so many people who are not Black are wanting to have conversations and ask questions, and they're curious about, something that I think that they just didn't really pay a lot of attention to in the past, because they didn't have to, because it wasn't so in your face like we saw with the video of George Floyd. And I think that as a Black person, we regularly would see these videos and didn't even need videos, because you knew it was in your own experience or knowledge of someone or friend or whomever who has had such a tragic or difficult experience with law enforcement. And so I think that we bring that important perspective to helping to people understand and digest what's happening in this moment.
Well, Esther was a queen at a tipping point, and she used her voice to protect a minority people that otherwise would have perished in the Persian court as a Jewish woman. Her voice, I've always respected. It was one of courage. It was one of smarts, and it was one of timeliness. And I'm wondering, do you think that, based on the perspectives that you've been covering, Lindsey, do you think that America has reached a tipping point? Is there anything about the perspectives that you've been covering that you think Americans just need to know and need to hear?
Well, I do think that this is a tipping point. Maybe it's more me being hopeful than based on fact, except that I think that we can all notice the difference and the change. When you look back to the March on Washington 57 years ago, it will be the anniversary in August, the protesters there, the marchers there were predominantly Black. There were certainly white people who were there and just supporting, but they were kind of sprinkled in among the crowd. And now, if you look at 2020, it's almost the reverse. In so many of these cities, of suburbs and pockets of rural America even, that are predominantly white people who are coming out and saying enough. And I think that that is what makes me hopeful, that the change, it's not, again, it's not just the outrage of those who are most affected, but those who are least affected, those who don't need to stand up, really, right? I mean, it's just only by people being good-natured and seeing that something is not right and that they want to stand up and say, hey, that's not right, right? People often are saying these days about how silence is complicit, right? Or silence is violence, that if you're observing it and you just say nothing, that becomes just as much a part of the problem. And so I am encouraged by non-Black people who are saying enough. And I do think that gives me hope that this is going to change. And for my 6-year-old son, maybe things are going to be different, and I'm at least hopeful for that.
Well, you mentioned having a son, and I have 3 sons. And it's been hard for me as a mother of a future man to hear those who've been willing to be vulnerable on social media and talk about the fear that they have as Black men in America, and the frustration, the anger, the long-standing pain. I'm wondering, how does your role as a mom inform what you do, and how did it inspire the books that you have published through Zonder Kids that we certainly want to talk more about today?
Sure. Well, I actually, as you probably know, it takes a long time for a book to come to fruition, right? I had this idea about embracing diversity and celebrating how we're more alike than different years ago. And it really was just based on the climate and the culture of the division and the divisiveness and what, my young son was seeing play out, on TV, in the news, or in the streets. And so I felt like, let me combat the outside noise and hopefully encourage him and others that are young to stay the course of where they are, because I'm reminded of it, and it's a different meaning really in the Bible, but and a child shall lead them. So I want to take it in a kind of my own meaning here. But people will always say that, kids don't see color, but kids absolutely do see color. They just don't assign a value to it. It's the adults who do that. And so I always feel like with a child's heart and with a child's mind, that's where we need to get back to as society and as adults in this society, because kids, they come up with, and I'm just observing my son, who's kind of my muse and has inspired all of my children's books. But kids will say, he'll come home from camp or school and say, oh, I made a new friend today, and they like Legos too, or Star Wars too. He won't tell me about their skin color. He won't tell me about their religion. He won't tell me about, their views on, their family's political views. That's not what kids use to define who they're going to be friends with. They immediately find the likeness, the similarities. What do we have in common? And I think that's where we as adults have to get back to. But, more than anything, I felt like not talking about race is dangerous. I think, and it's something that, as we've been interviewing educators and everything in this time, where he was, a particular gentleman we were talking to said that, Black families have been talking about race for decades because they had to. And I think that white families are starting to realize we need to talk about race. We need to, right? In order to educate children. And I felt like, and the same gentleman said, if a child is old enough to formulate or articulate the question, they're old enough to hear the answer. Because it was difficult for me, we have always talked about how we're different in a way that's positive, not in a way that divides us. And so that was the messaging, and my idea for this book was to show kids, not to like avoid the elephant in the room, that kids have different color skin or hair or features or likes or dislikes, but say, yes, that's all true. We're all different. But guess what? God gave us all this really important gift, the most important part, and that's heart. And that's the heart. And it's the most important because that's where love starts.
Absolutely.
I wanted to kind of preemptively strike, and rather than my son seeing on the news or hearing about like, oh, this person's different, I want to like him to already have that established, like, yes, we're different, but that's not what's important. What's important is that we love each other in our differences and that we seek first what we have in common.
So many of the things that you're talking about resonate with my faith, Lindsey, because you talk about the importance of using your voice. You're talking about the importance of celebrating our differences, but that it's taking white voices, Black voices, working together to really see the change. I mean, that's the definition of the church, right? We're all different parts of the body, and we come together to use our gifts for a larger mission. And I like to think about God as an artist. I like to think, biology, I studied the sciences before I went into ministry, and it's so intricate. Only a creator who loves difference and in beauty and intricacy could have created us. And the fact that we're different is a celebration of, I think, all that he has devised for us. I mean, it would be so boring, right, if we're all the same. And so it's being able to see that as a child and recognize its beauty, and it's being able to respect that as an adult, and to use your voice to turn around and lift somebody up if you have been in a position of privilege for whatever reason. We can all help. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind reading a couple of pages or maybe a favorite part of this book, just to give people an idea of the celebration that you're painting.
Well, I'll actually just start in the very beginning, because you pretty much said it about like, how boring would it be if we were all the same? And that's something that I tried to capture in the book. And so I'll just read the first 2 or 3 pages here. You can see. In one itty-bitty corner of our great big world is our teeny tiny classroom filled with happy boys and girls. Each one of us is different, because what fun would it be if I looked like my classmates and they all looked like me? Our faces make a rainbow, lots of colors all around, shades of tan and melon skin and even chocolate brown. Some are missing 2 front teeth while others smile with dimples. God made each of us unique. It really is that simple. And there is one other part that I really like in the end that also speaks to, again, the faith, face, and God's hand in our creation. So we've got a lot of elbows, we've got a lot of hands, we've got eyes to help us see, and feet so we can stand. But the thing that matters most is something we can't see, the touch of God that's inside you and also inside me. That's the place where kindness grows and where love gets its start, deep down in our pumping, thumping, one big heart.
I just love that, Lindsey. What a great job. And clearly it's resonating so much when, like I said at the beginning of the episode, it's sold out on Amazon. It's such a timely book, and your voice is timely. It's kind of going back to the Esther idea. There's something here that we all need to hear. So what would you say to a well-intentioned parent, to really any American in general who wants to move from the theoretical to the practical? What would you advise are practical steps that parents can take to support this kind of growth and change that I think so many involved in the movement are eager to finally see happen?
Sure. I think that it starts with just exposure. And I think back to when my son was in preschool and he was 2, and he was at a great school and had great friends. But I changed schools for him because he was the only Black student and because diversity matters. And I think that for the other parents, they didn't realize the value in diversity. It's not just me as a Black parent raising a Black son who should be worried about exposing my son, making sure that he sees people regularly who don't look like him. The white parents should be just as concerned about their children not seeing or being exposed to kids who look different from them. I think that quite often when we are afraid of something, it's because we don't know it. So somebody recently said something to the effect of, it's not facts that will change minds, it's friendships. And so if your child, let's say you live in an area where you can't necessarily get them exposed to kids who are brown or black, or yellow, and maybe it's a church, maybe it's a play group, maybe it's the books that you buy, maybe it's the toys that you buy, or whatever it is, the places that you go, that you find a way so that children are not just seeing the same thing all the time. I think that that's not healthy, for just as unhealthy for white children as it is for black children. It's imperative on parents that they expose their kids to diversity. And like I said, minimally, it could just be a book, so they are seeing characters that they may not normally see in their everyday life. There was an essay that I read once. It was called Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. And the idea was that a book, an effective children's book, should provide a window so that a child is able to see look into a world that may be unfamiliar to their own, a mirror so they can see themselves reflected in the book. And if it's successful at both, it can become a sliding glass door, so they can effectively transport themselves into that unfamiliar world. And so it is something as simple as, and I'm not just trying to sell a book here, but I do think that it's as simple as, it's not that easy to change your church or change your school, right, in order to have diversity, but you can make sure that your children are familiar through book for starters.
It's grounding in relationship, and I think cultivating an empathy, right? Because real change happens out of an empathy from relationship. You feel how the other person feels. I think that's part of the power of the George Floyd video, quite honestly. And I just know from my chaplaincy work, sometimes with adults, it's kind of hard to break through. We have our ways of viewing things. We're used to, for better or worse, sometimes going on autopilot, but sometimes crisis moments have that ability to break in and to cause us to reassess, whether it's our faith, whether it's the way things happen around us. And I see the situation with George Floyd in particular really doing that. I think that it is a powerful situation that has the ability indeed to make real change should people take, like you said, the practical steps to follow up with that. Is there anything you'd like to say? I know you're on a time limit today, but is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation before we close?
Sure. I'll just add something that you and I were discussing earlier, is that New Jersey is about to be the first state in the nation to require that African American history be taught in every grade. And I think that that's a great start. Knowledge is power, and people who start to learn and become informed are going to likely be, to use your word, more empathetic, right? If you just have had that experience or exposure or knowledge. And so I think that that's a step in the right direction. And I'm happy to see legislators taking, so really rather quickly, when you think about it, about 2 weeks time, in many cases, laws are changing, legislation is being reformed and changed, and laws are being reformed, and legislation is being changed. And I'm excited to see, that even happening in the classroom, and not just, the focus can't just be on the policing in America. It has to be on educating the youngest among us.
Absolutely, because they're the future, right? When you say that, there was one thing that I read on teachingtolerance.org that I just wanted to piggyback on what you said. They have a number of tips that they recommend, but these were a couple that I thought were worth sharing. They're basically compelling education systems to think about listening to multiple perspectives and voices of marginalized people, collect oral histories tied to racial issues, solicit both cognitive and emotional responses to primary sources, and do that by assigning art projects, poetry, short documentaries, and traditional academic essays tied to those sources. So when you take the step of not only exposure, but soliciting the emotional responses to primary sources, it seems to me that that's inviting students to personalize the history and to really try to understand. And so thank you for doing that, Lindsey, through your children's book and through all that you're doing through social media, ABC. It's just been a delight to have you here.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It was an honor talking with Lindsey. Right now, I'm trying to listen and learn and take practical steps for change. I encourage you to do the same. I also hope you check out Lindsey's books, The World is Awake and One Big Heart. One lucky viewer will win the One Big World box set. It includes both of Lindsey's books and 10 art prints to frame. Register on my website at www.noelkirshner.com. Thank you to the Christian publisher Zonderkids and Jessica Westra for providing this gift bundle. This special set is available for purchase only through Barnes & Noble. I will announce one winner on my website after the episode has aired for 1 week. If you're local to the Summit, New Jersey area and looking for opportunities to expose your children to diversity, I encourage you to check out my church, Central Presbyterian Church. Its annual MLK service is especially moving. Also, high schoolers can serve as tutors for inner city youth through the Elizabeth Port Tutoring Program. There are many other opportunities to get involved as well. Lindsey mentioned in our interview that writing a book is a process. I found the same to be true. I just published my first book for sale, How to Live Your Life Purpose, the 6-Step Journey to God's Best. With so many out of work due to the pandemic, I pray that it's especially hope-filled and timely. It is designed as a 6-week personal or group study for Amazon Kindle, but it's available in paperback too. My contact information, as well as Lindsey's, will follow on screen. So until next time, may calm be with you.